In this episode, we talk about BJP leaders facing flak in Gujarat following the severe flooding last week. We also talk about the Supreme Court coming down heavily against the practice of Bulldozer Justice. But first, we talk about Assam's new Muslim marriage law. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Last Thursday, the Assam Legislative Assembly passed a bill that aims to not only better regulate marriages between two Muslim individuals, but also, according to the government, prevent child marriages, monitor polygamy, and ensure that marriages without the consent of the parties are prevented. This is the Assam Compulsory Registration of Muslim Marriages and Divorces Bill, the state's newly proposed Muslim marriage law. Among its key features, the bill also stipulates that qazis or Muslim registrars will no longer be required for officially registering marriages. To discuss the changes that this law brings about and the reasoning behind it, Indian Express's Sukrita Baruah joins us. Sukrita, the government had actually first decided to repeal the state's Muslim marriage law back in February, and it is only now that they have done so and passed a new law in its place. Tell us why the state government decided to do this.
Right. So this decision that you're speaking about, it was the decision to repeal an 89-year-old law which has been in place in Assam, which governs the registration of marriages and divorces between Muslims in the state of Assam. And it was called the Assam Muslim Marriage and Divorce Registration Act 1935. And the primary reason that they cited was that it has provisions that enable underage marriages, so marriages between girls who are below 18 and boys who are below 21 to take place. And while citing child marriage as the reason for, doing away with this old act, the government had pointed to two particular sections of this old act. One is Section 8 and Section 10. So Section 8 of the law basically talks about, the process of making an application to the registrar for registration of marriages. And I quote a portion of it. I quote, provided that if the bride and groom or both be minors, application shall be made on their behalf by the respective lawful guardians. So this is something that's stated in the act. And in Section 10 as well, which talks about the process of, making entries in the marriage register. These are all like very bureaucratic details, but it mentions this, that if the bride or groom or both are minors. So this was explicitly written in the act. So the Assam government kind of pointed out to these sections and saying that these leave the door open to enable child marriages to take place under this act.
Yeah, and basically under the Muslim personal law, we know that the marriage of a bride who has attained puberty is considered valid, and puberty is assumed at the age of 15. Now, when we talk about this decision to bring about a new law, it has actually come after a major crackdown by the state on child marriages last year. Can you talk about this crackdown? Because this was when a lot of people were arrested by the state.
So there was a big punitive crackdown last year in which over the course of a couple of months, more than 4,000 people were arrested as part of a crackdown on child marriages. And most of these were either men who had married minors, relatives of either the boy or the girl, the man or the bride. And some of them were also religious functionaries who had solemnized such underage marriages. So that is something that has been going on and it's been an emphasis by the state government. So then they announced this decision to repeal this act as a continuum of this emphasis by the government.
Okay, now that they have passed this new law, what are some of its key features and what changes is it expected to bring about?
So, right at the beginning, I want to make one thing clear. In some places, I have seen people, saying or reporting that, now the registration of Muslim marriages and divorce in Assam is mandatory, but that's actually not the case. So when this law was first introduced in 1935, it was for the voluntary registration of Muslim marriages and divorces. It was not compulsory. But following a decision by the Supreme Court in 2010, this act had been amended and the word voluntary had been replaced by compulsory. So even under this older act, the registration of Muslim marriages and divorces was actually compulsory. It was not voluntary. One of the key things that changes is that this act, it lays down a list of 7 conditions. If which these are fulfilled, then the marriage may be registered, has to be registered. And one of these states that, that the woman has to have completed 18 years of age and the groom needs to have completed 21 years of age. So that is kind of set down in writing in this particular act. The other thing is that the functionary has been completely changed. So under the old act, it stated that, any person being a Muslim can be authorized by the government, to act as a registrar, a Muslim registrar, and that this person would be deemed a public servant. So these were essentially qazis, okay? And there were 95 such qazis across the state of Assam who were registering Muslim marriages. But now that role has been done away with completely. And the person whose responsibility it is now to register marriages under this act is the jurisdictional marriage and divorce registrar, who is essentially the sub-registrar. So it's a government officer now who has been given this role. An important point has actually been cited by lawyers earlier also, and which an opposition MLA Aminul Islam from the AIUDF he brought up, was that if the government's primary intent is to address the provision that enables child marriage, then those section 8 and 10 that I mentioned could be amended. And he cited this amendment, right, that in 2010, the registration had been changed from voluntary to compulsory. So similarly, section 8 and 10 can be amended and that objective will have been achieved. But in the assembly, Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma said that that was not enough for us because our intent was not just to change this particular provision, but one of our inherent motives was also to do away with the role of the qazis. We don't want them to, be a part of this process anymore. So for that, a new legislation had to be brought.
Right. So in that sense, Muslim marriages will now be much more under the purview of the government. In fact, apart from the change in functionary, there has also been a change in the process as well. Tell us about some of those changes.
So a process very similar to the one that is under the Special Marriage Act is now in place. Submit an application to the sub-registrar at least 30 days in advance. And, they have to submit all their documents like proof of age, proof of place of residence, proof of identity. And then this will be put up in a public place. And if someone has objections, they will come forward. And also there's one provision that during this period of scrutiny of documents, if the sub-registrar finds that either of the parties is a minor, then they have to report this to the jurisdictional child marriage protection officer. So that's a position under the Prevention of Child Marriage Act. So that is also an additional duty. So that whole process is there. So if someone comes forward with an objection within 30 days, then the sub-registrar has to inquire into this. And then if there are no objections, if that's resolved, then they can register the marriage. So a process very similar to the Special Marriage Act is in place. Again, this is something that, experts had said earlier. And this is also a point that again was raised in the assembly. And what the opposition MLA who brought up this concern up said that this is a more difficult process than what was already in place. And it does make the process of registration of marriages harder. What an expert had told me earlier is making the process more challenging, especially for poor people, illiterate people. There is a chance that maybe as many people won't register. So yeah, that concern was flagged.
Sukrita, also the passing of this bill comes at a time when the government led by Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma has been taking decisions involving the Muslim community and at a time when he has been speaking out against them. For instance, we saw the State Legislative Assembly last week doing away with the provision under which the House used to adjourn for 3 hours between 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Friday, essentially the period for Jummah. And then at a time when tensions have been simmering in the Sivsagar district, we heard Sarma say that he will take sides and, quote, will not let Mia Muslims take over all of Assam. Talk about these recent changes by the government and this rhetoric by the Chief Minister.
So the atmosphere in Assam has been pretty tense, in the last week, 10 days or so, because there was a horrific incident which had taken place. A 14-year-old girl in Nagaon's Dhing district had allegedly been gang raped by 3 men, and she was found by the side of the road late in the evening by locals. So everybody rushed forward to condemn this incident, and it got a lot of media and political attention. And it turns out that the accused are Bengali Muslims. And then, there was a certain discourse that came to be around this incident, over the identity of the accused. And, from many quarters, many ministers also called this an attack on the indigenous. And then there were some groups kind of raised this call that, all, I quote, Bangladeshis and Mia Muslims should leave this district. And they kind of issued this ultimatum that they have to do so within 7 days. So this issue was raised in the assembly, during the course of the assembly. 4 opposition MLAs did raise adjournment motions. And that's when things got really heated. I mean, they wanted to talk about the law and order situation in the state and about, what was happening in Sivsagar. And it got really heated. It never reached its conclusion, this discussion, because it really escalated. Some of the opposition MLAs had kind of said that, this is going to happen. People are going to move from one district to another. That's something that happens. And that really inflamed the chief minister. And he questioned why, they were even talking about, I quote, Mia Muslims moving into Upper Assam. So Upper Assam is, these eastern Assam districts like Sivsagar, Dibrugarh, Tinsukia, which are home to a lot of ethnic Assamese communities. And there's a big concentration of Bengali Muslims in Lower Assam. So he was questioning why should they move from Lower Assam to Upper Assam. And then he said that, I quote, we will not let it happen. And then when members of the opposition, were like, how, you're taking sides, you're being partisan, then he kind of declared on the floor of the house that I will take sides, I am partisan. So, things in the assembly got really heated earlier this week. And this was before the passage of the bill. So, for the rest of the session, of course, things were tense. But it concluded on Friday, this assembly session.
And next we talk about Gujarat. Last week, severe flooding in the state submerged large areas, displacing thousands and causing widespread and extensive damage. The floods triggered by a deep depression over Rajasthan and Gujarat have claimed 36 lives so far. And while the rains have reduced, there are areas where people continue to remain stranded, and the persistent waterlogging has now raised concerns for diseases like dengue, cholera, and typhoid. Among the areas that continue to face problems is the city of Vadodara.
So it was on August 26 that the whole state of Gujarat began receiving heavy rainfall with more than 25 districts on red alert. Vadodara was among them.
That's Indian Express's Aditi Raja.
This flood that, that Vadodara witnessed last week was the worst in the last 20-25 years is what the estimate is, because the city has expanded and the danger level of Vishwamitri is 24 to 26 feet at various intersections. The maximum sensor level at Vishwamitri is 35.25 feet, beyond which the sensors cannot tell you how huge was the flooding. And this time, the estimate is that in several places that flood first, the earliest, the river had crossed up to 40 feet.
She says for almost 48 hours starting last Monday evening, the water level in the city continued to rise.
Submerging everything, right from homes, cars, shops, everything. So it was a scary on Tuesday night, on Wednesday night. The entire city was just scared, it was so fearful that none of the rescue boats could actually reach anywhere. Every time that Vishwamitri floods, tractors come out to, immediately reach out relief material to places that could get marooned. But this time, the tractors, the JCBs, your bigger vehicles, none could venture into the water that was just rising and perhaps crossed 40 feet at most parts of the city, which could not be recorded beyond the maximum sensor level.
She says it was only late Thursday afternoon that the water finally started receding.
And even today, there are several areas, several lanes that have not yet drained out completely. There are several societies, several residents who have been tweeting photographs of their internal roads continuing to be flooded and reeking because, the river isn't really a very, very clean source of water. So, although power has been restored, people are assessing their damage. People are still cleaning their homes. There is a lot of garbage that is still lying around, although the VMC, assisted by teams from other corporations of Surat and Ahmedabad, has been working round the clock to clear the garbage and silt left behind by the flood water. But it will take a couple of days more for this activity to be completed and for people to actually be able to get back to normal, because a lot of other residents have lost vehicles. None of the vehicles that they owned were, in areas where the deluge was severe. Vehicles have two-wheelers, four-wheelers, everything has drowned. and a lot of people are waiting for, vehicles to be returned to them to return to their normal life.
Now, at this time, the people in the city are really angry towards the ruling BJP government. Aditi says the anger has spilled onto the streets in Vadodara, where residents are hitting out at the leaders and dumping garbage outside their premises to protest against the authorities. Over the past few days, videos of elected representatives being heckled and turned away from several parts of the city have gone viral on social media.
So this anger on the ground has come because of the intensity of the flood. We did speak to a lot of people as well as leaders from political parties. The anger is more for the ruling party, but there have been protests also against leaders of other political parties like Aam Aadmi Party and Congress visiting areas where people were marooned. The reason for that is that the flood was unprecedented. Nobody was expecting this magnitude of, deluge, because the previous floods had been severe, but the damage that this particular flood has caused this time is enormous. The anger against the ruling party also stems from the fact that Vishwamitri River is known to, flood the city, and it has been 14 long years since the civic body and the ruling party has been promising a redevelopment, a rejuvenation project of this Vishwamitri River that could mitigate the future flood risks for Vadodara. But unfortunately, ever since the proposal was first tabled in the civic body in 2008 by the then Mayor Balkrishna Shukla, the project has not taken off on the ground.
In fact, the last announcement to rejuvenate the Vishwamitri River and mitigate the flood risk was by the then Vijay Rupani-led state government in December 2019. This announcement had come just 4 months after the city of Vadodara went underwater on 2 separate occasions, in July and in August.
It was called the Holistic Development Project that would work on the river from its origin in Pavagadh in Panchmahal district to its amalgamation with the Gulf of Khambat, and a detailed project report was also prepared by the VMC, submitted to the NGT, and the NGT even approved the DPR, but the project never took off. And then we have this flood again, and on Thursday when the Chief Minister visited Vadodara right after the water started receding, there was this announcement of a 1,200 crore historic project to rejuvenate the Vishwamitri River to mitigate future flood risks. But at this point, the citizen of Vadodara on ground is so cynical about these announcements that they know that, there are these promises that have been made for 14 long years, 14 long years, and not a single activity on ground to show that the project is taking off. There is a lot of anger on the ground for the simple fact that people think that they, at this point, with the damage in front of their eyes, they think that they have been taken for granted.
And Aditi, the other thing is that Vadodara has been a BJP bastion. In fact, it was from Vadodara that Prime Minister Narendra Modi won in the 2014 Lok Sabha elections. Is this kind of anger against the party unusual in that sense?
In a way, yes, because, this is the first time that people have been questioning the rationale of seeking votes in the name of Prime Minister Narendra Modi when his representatives in the city have not been able to deliver the promises made by him. In fact, the fact that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has not taken even to X platform to tweet about the deluge or offer his sympathies to Vadodara city has been noted by a lot of residents, and it has been conveyed to a lot of leaders who have been heckled in many places that nobody really cares about Vadodara anymore. It is unusual that people are questioning the BJP about their campaigns in the name of Narendra Modi while seeking votes for even civic polls. And this is definitely not usual anger. However, there are 2 camps within the party that have mixed feelings about this anger. One faction of the party feels that, this is serious and it should be taken note of, because a lot of people fended for themselves when they were actually marooned. There was no relief reaching anywhere. So, now when the water has receded and leaders have started arriving in these areas, the only question that people are asking is, where were you when, the river was flooding? Where were you when the project was not, executed, when it was sent to cold storage, not for 1 or 2 years, but 14 years? And why have you come here now? There are residential colonies that have put up banners even today, warning politicians from venturing into the area. So the anger is real, but the other faction of the BJP also feels that it will cool down on its own, because traditionally Vadodara has always been a safe seat for the BJP, and not just in the Lok Sabha polls but also in the local body. The BJP has had its way every single election in the last 3 decades. But they do know that, this is probably their last chance with Vishwamitri, and they would probably have no choice but to now at least begin working on the rejuvenation of the river, which again is not a project that will be executed within a couple of years, as it's a long work that will take, to make the river of risk free, flood free for Vadodara.
And in the end, we talk about Bulldozer Justice. The Supreme Court yesterday came down heavily on Bulldozer Justice, questioning how a house can be demolished just because it belongs to an accused or even a convict in a criminal case. The court said that it intends to create nationwide guidelines to address these concerns. Now, the practice of Bulldozer Justice first became popular after the UP government, under the leadership of Yogi Adityanath, started bringing down properties of accused to make an example of them and put pressure on those absconding. Since then, several BJP-ruled states and even Congress ones have followed suit. For example, one of the chief ministers who emulated the UP government was Madhya Pradesh's Shivraj Singh Chauhan. Chauhan's government demolished 16 houses and 29 structures, leading to the chief minister being referred to as Bulldozer Mama, similar to his UP counterpart who has been called Bulldozer Baba. When we spoke to Indian Express's Asad Rehman, he told us about this practice.
So this concept of bulldozing or demolishing homes of people who've been accused of crimes started in 2017 after Yogi Adityanath became the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh. So what essentially happens is, when someone is accused of a crime, the development authority or the city municipality, what they do is they then serve the person or their house or the owner of that house with a notice saying that this house is illegal. And then they say that it's illegal, and then the demolition is carried out in presence of heavy police force and in presence of other revenue officers and other administrative officers.
He says, for instance, in 2022, protests were carried out in Prayagraj over comments made by the former spokesperson for the BJP, Nupur Sharma, against Prophet Muhammad.
So this protest was held, and that protest turned violent. And then the police accused this local activist, Mohammad Javed, of being the mastermind of that protest. This was the allegation leveled by police, that he was the one who instigated the crowd, and that he was the one who collected the people, and that he was behind the violence that happened. And Mohammad Javed, who was 50 at the time, 50 years old, had denied these allegations, and he had gone to jail. And while he was in jail, his family had alleged that they were served a notice saying that your house is illegally constructed and that it will be demolished. Within 24 hours, without them having the chance to give a reply to that notice or to seek legal recourse, go to a court, their house was demolished in the presence of very heavy police force.
Now, the family had claimed that they were paying the electricity bill, the house tax, and the papers were in order.
But the government and the local development authority, in this case, which was Prayagraj Development Authority, had claimed that it was illegal, and that is why it was demolished. Most times what happens is that the government or the government machinery claims that the process for the demolition was ongoing from before, and that they had been served a notice prior to the alleged crime also. And it just so happened that this crime also came at the same time. And there have been several instances of these in the last few years in Uttar Pradesh. If you see, I think there'll be some in almost all 75 districts. And if you look at the kind of crimes people have been accused of where such action is taken, then you might see a pattern that it's mostly cases of violence against police, like, for example, Vikas Dubey's buildings in construction and his possessions were demolished after he and his gang had allegedly attacked a police team.
And he says there have been cases where properties that don't belong to the accused have also been demolished.
Then also, if you look at the UP government has also done this against very serious proclaimed offenders like the gangsters. So, for example, the Atiq Ahmed, Mukhtar Ansari, and the bigger gangsters who are there in UP. So their properties have also been demolished by the use of bulldozers over the years. So some of the cases are those who are accused of different crimes, or some of the cases are people who have been accused of multiple crimes over the years, or those who have a history sheet in the state. So if you look at, the government has also put out the amount of money it has recovered from this action and a lot of other details as well.
And he says despite the objections raised about it, this practice has been associated with quick justice in UP.
That, one person is accused of a crime today, tomorrow his house is demolished. It's instant justice in a way. So some people in the state are supportive of this. We've seen at BJP rallies that some BJP workers and supporters or common people have brought big bulldozers and have started calling Yogi Adityanath the bulldozer Baba. So those are political aspects of it, and social aspects also, that some people are quite accepting in terms of, like, they don't have a problem with this kind of justice or this kind of system where a person's house is demolished merely because he is accused of a certain crime.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.